There are certain kinds of horror audiences pretend to understand: murder, ghosts, demons, monsters in the dark. These are comfortable fears, external fears. They preserve a childish fantasy that danger arrives from somewhere else, that the threat can be pointed at, named, shot, exorcised, escaped. But biological horror does something far more offensive. It suggests that the emergency call is coming from inside the meat, that your organs are not loyal, your cells are not loyal, even reproduction. That sacred evolutionary function we romanticize as life-giving is, under the right lens, one of the most invasive and humiliating acts the body can perform against the self. A thing grows. It consumes your nutrients, rearranges your hormones, rewrites your appetites, alters your sleep, changes your psychology. And if that thing is not fully human, or not fully under your control, then pregnancy stops being miracle. It becomes occupation, an internal coup. And that is why tonight we are not discussing horror's usual poster, children in a shallow top 10 scary pregnancies format. We are going deeper, weirder, into films where the true terror is not childbirth itself, but biological betrayal. The moment consciousness realizes it is merely renting space inside a body that has its own agenda. This is where body horror stops being gore and becomes ontology, because these films do not ask, "What if something horrible happens to you?" They ask, "What if you were never the primary inhabitant to begin with?" Clear rules, clear vectors, flesh under invasion. We begin with the easiest form of this fear, the body as contaminated territory, a place where transmission is understandable, symptoms are measurable, and the violation is still tactile enough to feel almost medical, which is exactly why it works, because the audience can still pretend this is just pathology, just infection, just bad luck, until the pattern becomes too intimate. James Gunn's grotesque Little Nightmare is often dismissed as splatter comedy. That is a mistake, because beneath the slime and satire, Slither functions like a brutal lecture on transmission vectors. The organism does not merely attack, it colonizes appetites. It enters through flesh, reproduces through bodily fluids, and converts desire itself into a delivery mechanism. Hunger becomes infection, sex becomes infection, curiosity becomes infection. The real genius here is that Gunn refuses the comfort of monster attack logic. This is not predator versus prey. This is ecosystem override. Human bodies are reduced to soft incubation chambers, walking nutrient bags designed to distribute biomass until they rupture into more carriers. And that is the first betrayal. The realization that our meat suits are biologically porous. Every opening is a vulnerability. Every instinct can be hijacked. You are not defended by being alive. You are exposed by it.
Oh, I'm living in my dream.
Then we move to something nastier. Not because it is louder, because it is more intimate. Baby blood places an ancient parasitic intelligence directly inside the womb and makes maternal biology indistinguishable from possession. The protagonist is not merely infected. She is converted into a mobile feeding apparatus, a bloodstream with legs, an ambulatory placenta. The parasite speaks, demands, negotiates, punishes. And this is where the genre begins to sharpen its knife, because pregnancy is usually framed as symbiosis. Baby blood reframes it as extortion. The host must feed what grows, must preserve what is consuming her, must protect the invader, because the invader is now physiologically fused to survival. This is the first appearance of internal betrayal in its purest form. The body's nurturing systems become the enemy. Instinct says protect. Consciousness says expel. Biology wins, and biology always wins. When institutions become reproductive machinery, at this stage, the threat is no longer just organic. It becomes administrative, medical, religious, domestic. The body is still under siege, but now the surrounding systems that should defend autonomy become mechanisms that accelerate contamination. This is where horror stops asking whether the parasite can enter and starts asking, who benefits once it does? Yes, this is one of the classics, but most analyzes flatten it into Satan baby. That misses the point entirely. The devil is decoration. The real monster is institutional consensus. A husband, doctors, neighbors, social etiquette, religious theater. An entire civilized infrastructure quietly agrees that Rosemary's body no longer belongs to Rosemary. Every complaint is dismissed. Every symptom is normalized. Every protest is translated into feminine hysteria. The genius of the film is that there is no visible parasite in the early stages, which means paranoia becomes the first symptom, and by the time she understands that her pregnancy is an organized theft of bodily autonomy, the machinery around her is already airtight. This is systemic failure at its most elegant. You do not need chains when everyone around you speaks in reassuring voices. You do not need a monster clawing through walls when polite society itself becomes the gestational chamber. If Rosemary's baby is institutional control in polished Manhattan interiors, Antibirth is institutional control after civilization has chemically rotted. Drugs, conspiracy, military experimentation, medical uncertainty. Nothing is stable enough to verify what is happening, which is precisely the point. The protagonist cannot even trust her own altered consciousness enough to determine whether she is pregnant, hallucinating, infected, or being manipulated by an unseen state apparatus. The genius here is diagnostic collapse. Normally, medicine gives language to suffering. In Antibirth, language itself malfunctions. No symptom maps cleanly onto any explanation, and when symptoms cannot be named, they become ontological threats. The body is changing, but without a reliable semantic frame, the self has no narrative defense. You cannot fight what you cannot classify. So the infrastructure designed to create certainty only generates more rot. Negative space, contaminated relationships, social trust dissolving. This is where the films stop relying on visible organisms, because by now they understand something more disturbing. You do not need a worm under the skin if suspicion can perform the same reproductive function. Paranoia is the perfect parasite. It spreads without proof, feeds on ambiguity, and turns every loved one into a possible host. Andrei Golovsky's Possession is one of the greatest depictions of biological and relational collapse ever put on film. On paper, it is about marital breakdown and an impossible creature, but the genius lies in how the film makes emotional alienation feel like reproductive contamination. Anna is no longer readable. Language stops functioning between husband and wife. Domestic conversations become semantic satiation, words repeated until they lose all stable meaning. Love, trust, fidelity, motherhood. These become hollow labels stretched over something wet and inhuman. The creature hidden in the apartment is important, yes, but it is not the primary horror. The primary horror is that interpersonal faith has decomposed so completely that monstrosity becomes a plausible substitute for intimacy. A husband looks at his wife and no longer recognizes species. That is the social boundary under attack. Not flesh, recognition. The moment familiar human behavior acquires an unreadable rhythm, the home becomes a laboratory of negative space. Everyone is waiting for evidence. No one needs evidence. Suspicion has already implanted. This is David Cronenberg, in full Cronenberg mode, the flesh externalizing psychic resentment. Children born not from affection, but from somatized trauma. Tumors with umbilical logic. The mechanism of genius in the brood is simple and devastating. Emotion is treated as reproductive tissue. Rage is not metaphorical, meaning the human psyche is no longer interior. It breeds, and once feelings become biological outputs, every attempt at psychological repression becomes a failed quarantine. You cannot manage trauma in this universe. You can only wait to see what malformed offspring it secretes. This is the point where the film stops saying the body can be invaded. They begin saying, the body manufactures invaders from unresolved consciousness. We are not attacked by foreign organisms. We culture our own. The self is no longer a stable category. Now we arrive at the deepest and weirdest layer. Not simple parasites, not pregnancies, not institutions, not paranoia, but the total collapse of the boundary between host and hosted, self and non-self, human and process. This is where biological betrayal becomes an ontological crisis. Yes, we return to the obvious names, but only because the franchise evolves from survival horror into pure reproductive nihilism. The xenomorph life cycle is not scary because it is violent. It is scary because it reveals the universe's view of mammalian life as disposable incubation hardware. Consent is irrelevant. Species boundaries are irrelevant. Sex distinctions are irrelevant. Any body can become a womb if punctured correctly. That is the true obscenity. Pregnancy detached from intimacy. Birth detached from care. Creation detached from meaning. Just insertion, gestation, rupture. A cosmic assembly line. And Prometheus intensifies this by introducing scientific ambition as another transmission vector. Humans go searching for creators and find only superior forms of biological indifference. They wanted God. They found laboratory fluid. The franchise's deepest statement is almost Lovecraftian. Life does not reproduce because it loves life. Life reproduces because chemistry is efficient at making more chemistry. You are not sacred. You are substrate. This is where the latter ends, because Titane no longer treats pregnancy as violation from outside. It treats the category of human itself as negotiable. Metal enters flesh. Identity enters disguise. Sex enters machinery. The body leaks substances that should not exist, and the audience gradually loses any stable language for what they are witnessing. This is the final betrayal, the fragility of boundaries. Male, female, machine organism, mother monster, self-performance. All temporary constructs, all permeable, all subject to revision by forces beneath conscious thought. This is why the film feels less like narrative and more like a fevered anatomical argument. It is telling us something deeply offensive, that identity is not essence. Identity is scaffolding, and scaffolding can buckle the moment biology decides to improvise. So what do all these films understand that ordinary horror often refuses to admit? That the monster is never just the fetus, never just the worm, never just the alien, never just the mutating tissue. Those are delivery systems, visual aids, wet metaphors. The deeper terror is the same in every case. Human beings survive by pretending their boundaries are stable. My body is mine. My thoughts are mine. My relationships are trustworthy. My species is distinct. My identity is coherent. These are useful fictions. Temporary constructs held together by routine, language, and denial. Biological horror exists to puncture that membrane, to remind us that beneath the social polish, beneath the medical terminology, beneath every romantic myth of parenthood and personhood, we are still organic systems built on consumption, replacement, mutation, and involuntary obedience to processes older than consciousness. We call it pregnancy when it is wanted. We call it infection when it is not. But both require the same humiliating truth. Something else is using your resources to become more itself, and your consent is philosophically irrelevant. That is why these films linger, because they are not fantasies. They are exaggerations of truths we would rather not examine. That selfhood is conditional, autonomy is fragile, and the line between nurturing life and being biologically harvested by it is much thinner than language allows us to say out loud. So the next time a horror film shows you something moving under skin, something feeding where it should not feed, something growing where there should only be self. Remember, the terror is not that the body can fail. The terror is that the body was never built to serve the person living inside it. It serves life, blindly, mechanically, without loyalty, and life is often the coldest parasite of all. Sweet dreams.